Welcome to Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It, the podcast where we dive deep into the journey from vision to reality. I'm Kelly Jackson, your guide on this path of self-discovery, transformation, and intentional living. Here, we explore everything from mindset shifts and personal growth to spiritual alignment and entrepreneurship, sharing insights, stories, and actionable wisdom to help you live a life in harmony with your dreams. Every episode will dig into what it means to not only dream big, but to actually consciously create the life you envision. Let's turn your dreams into real life. Let's talk about patterns. And I'm not talking about the ones on your clothes or your planner. I'm talking about the ones that run your life, okay? The ones that repeat quietly, sometimes painfully, sometimes beautifully, until you finally see them. Have you ever noticed how certain situations keep showing up in your relationships or your career or your health or your emotions? Same energy, different details. What if it's not just a coincidence? What if it's a pattern? And what if that pattern is actually a portal? Okay, this episode is a deep dive into the hidden rhythms behind your behaviors and choices and emotions, and how becoming aware of your patterns is one of the most powerful things that you can do to transform your life. And we're getting into all of it, okay? Personal growth, emotional loops, subconscious programming, even the metaphysical side of why the universe keeps handing you the same lesson in different packaging. So by the end of this episode, you will be seeing life through an entirely new lens. And chances are it's going to blow your mind in the best way. Because the moment you stop calling it a coincidence and start calling it a pattern is the moment you reclaim your power. So let's go. And I'm going to infuse this episode with those light bulb moment energy, okay? Because I really do I'm going to weave together some psychology, some neuroscience, spirituality, and even relatable storytelling here, okay? And I want to design this in a way that you're going to pause and you're going to reflect and you're going to say, whoa, that's me. Okay, you're going to have that light bulb moment energy. That's the light bulb moment. That's the energy I'm bringing to this episode, because this is something that this is like fun to talk about, okay? And I think you're going to understand as we go along. I feel like we're going to start with like, what even is a pattern and why does it matter? It's a good place to start, right? Well, patterns are repeated behavior. They're repeated behaviors, repeated thoughts, repeated feelings, or life situations, okay? And we all have them in love and work, in the way we talk to ourselves, in the energy we attract in our daily rhythms. I mean, we all have patterns. And patterns can be conscious or unconscious. And recognizing a pattern isn't about shame or judgment. It's about awareness. What we don't make conscious will continue to run our lives. Carl Jung. If you caught the episode 41 on shadow work, I talked a little bit more about that. And one of the things, like I said, he says is that until we make the unconscious conscious, we'll continue to run our lives, and we will call it fate. So I want to remind you, as always, that when we do this work, we're doing it from a place of loving kindness, okay? Shame or judgment's not going to help us. Loving kindness, self-awareness, like that's what we're doing here. That's what we're going for. Now, there is this concept that I know that you're aware of, that life is a mirror, okay? That life is a mirror. Life is a mirror. At some point you've heard that. You've maybe even said it, and you've certainly experienced it. But what does that actually mean? It means that your outer world is often reflecting your inner world. And this isn't to punish you, it's to show you. It's to give you the feedback that you might not realize that you need. And sometimes that feedback comes in the form of repeat situations or frustrating interactions or emotional deja vu that seems way too specific to be random. Okay? Life is always communicating with you. And if you find yourself constantly bumping up against the same challenges, a partner who doesn't listen, a job that drains you, friendships that feel one-sided, it's worth asking, what part of myself believes that this is normal or familiar or deserved? Okay? That's where things get juicy. Because when you stop blaming the external and you start getting curious about the internal, that's when everything begins to shift. Life is reflecting back to you where you were wounded, where you were healed, where you're holding on to old stories, and where you're finally ready to write new ones. And the mirror doesn't lie, but it can be cleaned. I'll give you an example. And you might have already heard this example, but after my divorce, I decided to start dating again. And I started reverting back to patterns of promiscuity that I had when I was in college before I had met my ex-husband. And I realized, and I was dating, and I realized that I keep attracting the same types of people, the same types of men. And the common denominator in all of these relationships is me. I recognized the pattern. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that was huge for me, because that when I saw the pattern of these men and I saw how all of the ways they were the same, what I realized was the pattern was me. I was the one that was attracting these types of men. It was something going on in my internal world that was magnetizing this type of energy, right? Or that was accepting it or whatever. So it wasn't like, what's wrong with this guy? It was like, I need to look at myself. I need to stop blaming the external, these men, for not showing up and being who I need them to be. I'm not even being who I need myself to be. So of course I'm attracting men who aren't what I need them to be. I got to focus on me, right? So those patterns helped me. And there are patterns in your life that are there to help you as well. Now, here are some examples. I just gave you one of mine, with the men, but some common things is choosing emotionally unavailable partners, procrastinating when you're close to success. Okay. Overgiving is a pattern. Burnout is a pattern. Self-sabotaging when things get good is a pattern. These are common patterns. Maybe you recognize, or here's a money pattern. People like this example. This is a little bit of a more nuanced theme idea, I guess, but I'm going to throw it in here because it works. So if you think about, we as humans, we live our life as an average of our highs and lows, but our life we live as an average. So if you think of, I want you to imagine 3 horizontal lines. There's one on the top, there's some space, there's one in the middle, there's some space, and then there's a line at the bottom. So we have 3 lines. And then if you were to take your pencil and you were to draw a little squiggly line. So basically you're going to start at the bottom line and you're going to draw an arc up to the top so that the arc touches the top line, and then the arc's going to come down into a descent, right? And then the bottom of that depression will hit the bottom line, and then it's going to go back up. So you basically have this wave, right? That's going from the top, and then it's going down to the bottom, and up to the top, and down to the bottom, and it flows, and it's just like a little hill, and then a valley, a hill, a valley, a hill, a valley. Now that you have the visual, you are living your life on that middle line. Your life is the average, and you have your highs and you have your lows. And so I'm going to break this down to you as far as like financially, because a lot of people can relate to this one. That top line, that is like, let's say when you get to there's this certain number, and it'll be different for everybody, but when your bank hits that number, when you get that number, that's when you're like, oh, I'm good. I can play, I can spend, I can be a little frivolous with this money, right? And then you spend and you play and you have fun. And then there's another number that when your account gets to this number, you're like, oh, well, maybe I need to watch things a little more. Or maybe I need to reel it back in, right? That's like your bottom line. So you have this line that like when you get to this certain number, that's when you're like, oh, I'm good. I got some wiggle room here. And then you have another number where you're like, all right, I got to focus. Okay. But you're living in the middle. You're living as an average. And so this is why I said this was nuanced. What I want to share with you is this. So here's where you would recognize the pattern. If you can take that example and you can back away from it and you can recognize, oh, there is a number that when I get to about this much money in my account, I'm like, woo, let's spend it. And then when I get to this much number, I'm like, whoop, let's watch it. Okay. Well, so when you recognize the pattern, then that little visual that I had you come up with of like the wavy line, the hills and the valleys with 3 lines, now you can kind of like visualize, okay, I've got my max up there at the top, and I'm not going to go any lower than this down there at the bottom. And this is a pattern. And if I want to live my life differently, if I want my life to be a little more elevated, then what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to adjust that, like shift the pattern and adjust it, because I'm seeing that I need to adjust my top line and adjust my bottom line. Because if I want to live an elevated life, and if I know I'm living somewhere in the middle, then my new standard is not as low as it was before, right? My new standard of what I'm like, this is as low as I'm willing to go. Well, I'm going to shift that because I can do this because now I see a pattern. I've recognized it. This is what I do. I do it every time, right? Okay, moving on. Now, patterns are language of the subconscious, and they're not mistakes. They're not random. They are data points, which is why, kind of like that chart we were just doing, okay? They're your subconscious trying to get your conscious attention. As a reminder, your subconscious is like about 85 to 90 to maybe even 95% of your mental activity. It runs the show until you bring it to light. Okay? The body remembers. The mind repeats. And the heart craves resolution. And the harmony comes when we have brain-heart coherence, that mind-heart coherence. And the body remembers what that feels like to feel regulated. And okay, when something shows up again and again, a toxic job, a draining friendship, money drama, rejection in love, like whatever the case may be, it's not punishment. It's an invitation to interrupt the loop. I have an idea. I want to go a direction with this, and I want you to stick with me. Okay. Newton's first law of motion, the law of inertia, it states that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced external force. In simpler terms, things keep doing what they are doing, whether that's moving forward, staying stuck, being in a loop, until something changes. This is a powerful metaphor, guys, for human behavior, for habits, for patterns, and growth. We stay in our cycles, even the harmful ones, until we experience an interruption. And sometimes that interruption is painful, and sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes it's a quiet moment of clarity that breaks the loop, okay? And that's what I want you to hear. This is your invitation to interrupt the loop. This is where the healing actually begins. Not just in, getting out of it, quote unquote, but in understanding why it was there in the first place. Most people think that healing is about moving on, but sometimes it's about zooming in and asking, what am I being asked to see here that I have never seen before? And when you tune in to podcasts like this one, and when you read books about personal development, self-help, awareness, self-awareness, any of these sorts of things, but when you're tapped in, tuned in to this world, maybe it's some accounts you follow on social media, on YouTube or whatever, you start to become more and more aware, but then you start to really realize that everything is information. Everything holds information. And if you begin to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, and when you are on this intentional journey of self, where you're motivated to, inspired to, driven to live a life that feels really good, even when it's hard, because it's life, and sometimes life's going to be hard. Even when it's hard, it feels good. You love your life. You love who you are. You love who you're becoming. Even when it's hard, it feels good, right? Because you can, in that case, you zoom out to the bigger picture and you're not consumed by the circumstances of that moment, that season that you're in, right? And you can see the overarching grander picture that I really love my life. But what I'm saying is, when you get to that place and when you're doing that kind of work and when you get there, then you realize that sometimes you got to zoom in. Just like I said, you zoom out, but sometimes you got to zoom in and ask that, what do I need to see that I have never seen before? I once was blind, now I see, type of thing. Now, the science and psychology of repeating patterns is fascinating to me. Your brain is wired to follow the familiar and not the functional. We repeat what's predictable, even if it's painful, and that is called neuroplasticity and emotional survival, okay? As children, we internalize patterns based on how love and attention and safety and belonging were offered, or in some cases withheld. And those early experiences shape the emotional scripts, so to speak, that we live out in adulthood. And a lot of this happens by the age of 7. Okay? Like a huge portion of this happens by the age of 7. So you are not necessarily choosing the same things. Your nervous system is seeking what it knows. And this is why people keep attracting unavailable partners, or they can't hold money, or they always feel unworthy. Not because they want that outcome. Chances are they don't. But it's because that's what their system associates with love or identity or safety. It's what you know. And again, it also is what the subconscious, remember the subconscious, it's 85 to 95% of everything you do, say, and think's coming from the subconscious. So until you bring that into conscious awareness, your nervous system, your subconscious, all of these things, you will continue to repeat these patterns, okay? Because this is just what it knows. Another thing on that that's also kind of fascinating to me is the fact that we have these mirror neurons in our brain. These are actual brain cells that fire not only when we perform an action, but when we observe someone else doing it, okay? Our brains are literally wired to reflect, to take in behaviors and energy and emotions of the people and environments around us. It's why we can start yawning when someone else yawns, or you pass someone on the street and they smile at you and you smile back, or you feel sad when someone else cries. So when we talk about life mirroring us, it's not just poetic or spiritual, it is also neurological. And we're constantly tuning in to and reflecting back what we see and what we're surrounded by and what we've been programmed to believe. And that's why doing this kind of pattern work really matters, because if you do not pause to question what you're repeating, your brain will keep mirroring it back like a well-trained dance partner. Okay? And that may not be what you want. So I don't know. That's so interesting to me. I really love, I will say this, learning about the brain and all of this kind of stuff. This was not something that has been a fascination my entire life. This is really something that I began to become interested in and study and learn about on this intentional journey of self through my holistic healing practice and healing my body. As many of you know, you can listen to episode 2, my holistic healing journey. I mean, I lived with, diagnosed as depressed at age 11 and lived with depression, anxiety, ADHD, chronic IBS, chronic back pain, wore back braces, injections, scoliosis, like just all kinds of things. And just a slew of other things as well. And when I began my meditation practice, subconscious reprogramming, just all of the work that I do now, that I coach and teach on now, and that this podcast is about, right? That's when I started learning about all this. And it was just fascinating to me that just like, wow, just how the body works and how the brain works and how the nervous system, the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, just all of this, it's all connected, and how it really and truly affects the way that you experience life. I had never even heard of some of these things like before that I love now. It was not even in my conscious awareness. So if you haven't heard of some of these things, hey, that's okay. It's not just something you're born knowing, but if you're interested in this kind of work and living your most fulfilling and most authentic life, learn about this, because, you don't have to have a degree in science to need for this information to be important in your life, is what I'm saying. Like this is a part of science and the human body that anyone will benefit from reading about or learning a little bit about. Because it will truly shift the way that the quality of your life. I mean, really. Yeah. So, okay. You're not addicted to the pain. You're addicted to the pattern that once made you feel safe. I'm going to say that one more time. You're not addicted to the pain. You're addicted to the pattern that once made you feel safe. But maybe it's not making you feel safe anymore. That's why we have to zoom out. We got to zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, and we got to do this work, okay? From a spiritual and metaphysical viewpoint, patterns are sacred teachers. In spiritual growth, for instance, repeating patterns are like soul assignments, okay? Until you pass the lesson, you repeat the class. I mean, this is Earth School after all. At least that's what I call it. Not just me, but I know I'm amongst the people that like to refer to this as Earth School. Okay? So repeating patterns are soul assignments. Until you pass the lesson, you repeat the class. This is all about self-mastery, which is honestly, that's what Self-Love Uni is about, guys. At the very essence of Self-Love Uni, it is about self-mastery. I mean, really and truly, that's the essence of what it is, okay? So you repeat the lesson until you master it. That's all that's what it is. Every pattern holds a key, not just to healing, but to evolution. And patterns invite you to reclaim power and rewrite old stories and return to your truest self. We want to reframe this narrative of why is this happening to me to why is this happening for me? And what is this teaching me? Because if you find yourself with any of these situations, like, why does this keep happening to me? What if you ever, like, for instance, the first thing that popped into my mind was dating, okay? Partners, a history, a pattern of choosing the wrong partner. And if you, but with anything, if you just keep saying, why does this keep happening to me? It could be with friendships, it could be a platonic friendships, okay? Well, that's a pattern. It's a pattern. There's something there for you, okay? There's something there for you to see. And so get curious. I think that's the big C word. Get curious about it. Like, okay, I'm not going to get mad about it. I'm going to get curious about it. Well, what is this? Why is this happening for me? What is this teaching me? Okay. And here's some signs that you're breaking a pattern. So say you recognize it and then you're like, okay, now that I'm aware, I'm going to do things differently. And that's one of the signs that you're breaking a pattern. You respond differently than you used to. Another sign would be that you no longer feel drawn to what once consumed you. Okay? Another one would be you choose peace over chaos. Even when chaos is still coming and knocking, you're choosing peace. Okay? These are all signs that you are breaking a pattern. Shadow work is often the exact tool that helps us meet our patterns too. And not just from the mind, but from the soul. You guys know Mis Sombres, my art, all about shadow work. I believe in shadow work wholeheartedly. It is for everyone. And episode 41, all about shadow work, check it out. It's a really good one. And we do shadow work inside of Self-Love Uni, absolutely, for sure. And I just want to mention it here because this is one of the, if you're curious about your patterns, well, this is a time for shadow work, okay? Another way that you can learn to recognize and work with your patterns is to look at your life like a movie, okay? So what themes repeat in different characters and chapters? Like I've said before when I was dating, that it was like I was dating the same man. I mean, he had a different name. He had a different job. He looked different, but it was like the same man, right? I just kept dating the same man. So it was like different characters, but it was like the same theme, the same issues, the same stuff. So, and then in different chapters, again, what themes keep repeating? Like is living paycheck to paycheck just a theme that's repeated in your college chapter of life, and then in your early adulthood chapter of life, and then in your, just starting a family chapter of life? And then is this just, are you kind of feeling stuck? Do you feel like this has just been a theme? This theme of lack has been repeating itself in every stage of your life, okay? So, and where do you always feel stuck? Like, do you always feel stuck in love? Do you always feel stuck in finances? Is it your health? Can you just not seem to get your health in check, right? Where do you feel misunderstood? And where do you always feel misunderstood? I got to throw that word in. Now, a side note, healthy relationships, communication. I'm sure you've heard this before, that we want to avoid when we were talking to other people, whether it's a partner, a child, a friend, whatever it is. You always do this. You never do this, right? We want to avoid using the words always and never, because that's like, really, they always do it. Do they never do it? But we tend as humans to kind of say that. You always do this. You never do this. Well, here though, so I'm throwing that out there because that is something to be mindful of. Do be mindful, not use you always do this. You never do this. But here, I think it's important to use the word always. And here's my thought process on that. Because we're talking about patterns. And so here I want to say, where do you always feel stuck? Where do you always feel misunderstood? Where do you always feel drained? Right? Where do you always keep getting like this way? Because that's going to make you highlight those moments, will come to the forefront of like, this is like always a thing for me. Like maybe you're always running late. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a pattern. Like what is the thing for you? We all have our things, okay? So I'm going to give you some journaling. And then again, this is how to recognize it. And then we'll talk about, you got to work with it, and you do the shadow work, and you do these journaling prompts. Okay. Some journaling prompts that'll spark clarity. Like this keeps happening, ... When I feel blank, I tend to blank. When I feel bored, I tend to eat. When I feel embarrassed, I tend to hide. When I feel unappreciated, I tend to become passive aggressive. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like whatever it might be for you. Just identifying, you're sparking clarity and you're looking for patterns. The story I tell myself is ... And one thing I always tell people too, clients and just anyone, when you're doing, say, a journal prompt like that, the story I tell myself is ... Sometimes that can be really broad and really vague. And maybe that's okay for some prompts. But if you really want a more nuanced approach, you can always break it down into categories. So the story I tell myself about money is ... The story I tell myself about love is ... The story I tell myself about health is ... Okay, that's what I mean. Now, your triggers are breadcrumbs. Every trigger is tied to a pattern, okay? When you can trace it, you can transform it. So I just released an episode on triggers. Let me see when this was. Episode 37, The Gift of Triggers. A 10/10 recommend you check that one out, okay? Every trigger is tied to a pattern. When you trace it, you can transform it. And so integrating new patterns is like working a new muscle. It might be uncomfortable at first, but it is life-changing with consistency. And so, guys, I'm doing truly my best to provide you with all of the resources to do this kind of work, right? To do it. And I'm trying to condense them into these little 45-minute to 1 hour little sessions that you can plug into while you're cleaning, while you're commuting, while you're, doing whatever it is that you want to do. And you can this work is so transformative, and it's what happens when you break the pattern in your life. It's like you create space for love and for ease and for expansion, and you just create space, period. I want that for you. I see what it has done for me, and that's why I keep showing up like this for you, because it's what I feel called to do. Your nervous system starts to trust that safety can exist without struggle once you start breaking the patterns. And then that becomes your new baseline. Remember we talked about earlier. You become available for a new identity, one that is not surviving your old story, but is living a new one, thriving in a new one even, okay? And people might not recognize the, quote, new you. And that's okay. You didn't do it for recognition. You did it for liberation. Am I right? Now, I said this at the beginning, and I want to say it again. The moment that you stop calling it a coincidence and you start calling it a pattern, that's the moment you reclaim your power. Okay? There's another thing that I think I want to talk about. And it's this idea of the ancestral and generational patterns in our life. In other words, some patterns aren't ours, but we are still living them. And some of the patterns that you've internalized, they didn't even start with you, okay? They might come from your mother or her mother or even further back than that. And science calls it epigenetics. And this is the idea that trauma and behaviors can be passed down through generations and encoded in our very DNA. But here's something else that's really cool about epigenetics, is that you can upregulate your DNA. That's what epigenetics is about, and it's not set in stone. Even though it is encoded into your DNA, you are able to upregulate your DNA. In other words, you can actually change your DNA, not the sequence itself, but how the genes are turned on and off and how they are expressed. This is huge, guys. This is huge. You're not stuck, is what I'm saying. For example, you may be repeating relationship patterns, money beliefs, or emotional coping mechanisms that were modeled to you long before you had language. Okay? So breaking a pattern isn't just healing you. You are releasing an entire lineage. Oh my gosh, when I tell you, I just got chills. Ooh, I just got goosebumps when I said that. Oh my gosh, that was crazy. Okay. So, yeah, there is this pattern interrupt, okay? Sometimes we don't need a total transformation. We just need a jolt, okay? A pattern interrupt is that moment that you do something different than usual, even if it's tiny. And it creates space, and it gives your nervous system a new option, a breath instead of a reaction, a pause instead of a spiral, okay? When you interrupt the pattern, your body learns, oh, I have a choice. Okay? Now, you don't have to fix your whole life overnight. You might not even need to fix your life, okay? That word, I feel funny about the word fix, but you don't have to fix your whole life overnight, okay? But you can notice, where do I keep doing the same thing expecting a new result? Because, let's be honest, we've all done it. We've all done it. Nothing changes if nothing changes. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. But that doesn't change us from doing it. We keep doing the same thing and expecting a new result, okay? So ask yourself that, or notice that. And then the moment that you interrupt the loop, that's where the change begins, okay? The pattern does not equal your identity, because sometimes we can mistake our patterns for our personality, but you're not your pattern. You're someone who learned that pattern, likely as a way to cope or to survive, okay? Like if you've ever said, well, I'm just the anxious one, or I always attract unavailable people. Okay, that's not identity, that is repetition. And repetition can be rewritten. And on that note, if you say, I always attract emotionally unavailable people. Remember what we said about the subconscious? Here's another example. If we talk about finances, and if you've been on the struggle bus financially, but then it's kind of like, oh, money always comes in right at the last minute. Like, I need it, but it always comes in right at the last minute. Guys, if that's a story you keep telling, I'm stressed, but something always comes through right at the last minute. I always attract unemotionally available people. The subconscious mind, bringing us back to that, 85 to 95% of everything we do, say, think comes from the subconscious mind. If this is what you're affirming, if this is the neural pathways that you have created inside of your own self, your subconscious mind is going to say, oh, okay. And it is going to create the circumstances and situations to prove, to do what you believe to be true, who you are, what you're affirming, what you're saying, okay? So again, it's not identity, it's repetition, and repetition can be rewritten. This is neuroplasticity. This is creating new neural pathways. This is why we use affirmations. This is why we meditate. This is why we do all these things. This is why we work on self-awareness and shining the light of our consciousness on the unconscious parts of ourselves, so that we can break the pattern. Okay? When you separate who you are from what you have learned, that's when freedom becomes real. This also is about embodiment as well. Okay? The universe is matching you, guys. The external Patterns often are mirroring your internal beliefs. So if you're constantly feeling like you're not enough, you are going to notice that life keeps handing you situations to prove that. This is what I was talking about. It's not punishment. It is a pattern that is echoing until you notice it. And then once you do notice it, like one of those examples that I said earlier, like I keep attracting, why do I always attract emotionally available people? Or I'm on the financial struggle bus, but something always comes through right at the last minute. Like, okay, when we notice that, we notice it, and then we have this, it's in our conscious awareness, and we're like, okay, you know what? I keep telling that story and nothing's changing. Like, let me tell another story. Okay? This is what I'm talking about. Break the loop. It's less of the universe is testing you and more of the universe is reflecting what's unhealed. Okay? So you can bring love to it. No matter what it is, you can bring love to it. And then you might be like, well, what do I do with a pattern once you do spot it? Well, awareness is step one, but then what comes next type of thing. Notice it without judgment. Always. Name the pattern out loud. Ask, what was this pattern trying to protect me from? And then ask, well, what do I choose now? Okay? Sometimes the biggest healing is just seeing it clearly and choosing not to repeat it. Like even just one time. That can be huge. And if it's a deep pattern, well, you might need support, okay? And that's where things like coaching and journaling or even modalities like EMDR or somatic therapy can help you rewire what has been on repeat, okay? I've mentioned as well the EFT, emotional freedom tapping technique that I've learned and done before. I really like that as well. Your patterns aren't flaws, guys. They are feedback and they're roadmaps and they're soul signals, okay? And when you become aware of them, you begin to live on purpose and you start to choose instead of repeat, and you start to align instead of survive. And that's when everything changes. And it's not going to all change at once, okay? But moment by moment and choice by choice and breath by breath, it happens. And if this sparked something for you today, I invite you to explore the tools inside of Self-Love Uni or work with me one-on-one. Guys, you're not broken. Your patterns are just trying to bring you home to who you truly are, and you know that's where you're meant to be. I love you, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It. I hope today's episode sparked something powerful within you. Remember, every step you take towards your vision counts, no matter how small. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a second to hit that subscribe button or leave a review. That would be amazing. Or share the podcast with someone who's ready to bring their dreams into reality too. And if you're looking to dive deeper, connect with me on social media at Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It, or at BE_what you want. Or visit dreameditthenreallifedit.us for more resources on aligning your life, business, and dreams. Until next time, keep dreaming and keep manifesting your dreams into real life. Love you, friends.